I returned from the hospital with a fragile hope clinging to me. Hope for warmth, for comfort, for the familiar embrace of home. But when I stepped through the door, that hope collapsed. My room, the place where I thought rest and recovery awaited me, had been stripped away. My in-laws had moved in their belongings, scattered where mine once were. The smell of unfamiliar perfume lingered where Martha's lavender used to. Confused, I turned to Adeline, my daughter, the child I once carried on my shoulders, the one whose scraped knees I had kissed better. What happened to my room, I asked, my voice still weak from the surgery. She looked at me coldly, her eyes as hard as glass. Then she pointed to the backyard toward the small wooden doghouse we'd built years ago for Daisy, our old retriever. Her words cut sharper than any scalpel. Now you'll live here. It was betrayal, pure and merciless, and it hit me like a knife in the back. My knees trembled. My chest tightened in ways that had nothing to do with the healing wound beneath the surgical tape. I thought my heart had been repaired in the operating room, but in that moment it shattered. Still, I said nothing. Pride held me up where love had failed me. I packed the few things that still belonged to me, and I left. My destination wasn't a motel, nor the doghouse she had so cruelly pointed to, but my $1 million villa, the place I had bought quietly, years ago, a safety net I had never told them about. If she thought I was broken, she was wrong. A month later, the phone rang. Adeline's voice this time was softer, tinged with desperation. Dad, Carl and I, things are hard right now. The kids, the rent, we don't have anywhere to stay. Could we come live with you? You won't believe what I did, but before I tell you, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. 3 days earlier, I had been discharged from Mercy General Hospital. My trembling fingers pressed each button on the phone, slowly medication making everything harder. The small duffel bag sat beside me on the hospital bed, my cardigan, reading glasses, the book I never finished. My body was weak, but my heart longed only for one thing: home. When the phone rang, I forced my voice to sound stronger than I felt. Adeline, honey, they're discharging me. Can you come pick me up? A pause, the sound of cash registers, voices in the background. She was at work. Dad, I'm busy right now. Find yourself a motel or something. The line went dead. The dial tone buzzed in my ear like an angry wasp. I stared at the silent phone in my lap, my wedding ring loose around my finger from the weight I had lost. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the discharge papers. She's joking, right? I whispered to the empty room, but no one answered. A nurse walked past, her shoes squeaking against the polished floor, the smell of disinfectant sharp in the air. I tried Adeline's number again, but it went straight to voicemail. Her recorded voice, bright and cheerful, mocked me. You've reached Adeline Thompson. Leave a message and I'll get right back to you. I hung up without a word. My cardigan hung loose on my shoulders, draped like a scarecrow's clothing. I folded it carefully the way Martha used to fold my work shirts when she was still alive. For a moment, I let myself believe Adeline was just overwhelmed. Work, the kids, Carl. Surely she would explain later. But explanations never came. A city cab card sat on the nightstand, and with shaking hands I dialed. Mercy General Hospital to 1420 Oak Street, Evanston. The taxi arrived with a honk. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror as I slid into the back seat, a pale man too thin for his clothes, moving carefully, as if every step might break him. The worn leather creaked under my weight. I whispered the address like a prayer, 1420 Oak Street. The villa came into view, grand, silent, untouched by betrayal. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and breathed. For the first time since Martha's passing, the house felt alive. My house, my space, my dignity. And so when Adeline called a month later, begging for a place to stay, I knew the answer I would give her. Because love is patient, but love also remembers. I'd lived in this neighborhood for 2 years now, ever since selling my Detroit home to help with their mortgage. I told myself it was temporary at first, but it had become home, the place where family waited, where the laughter and chaos of grandchildren filled quiet rooms, where memories intertwined with everyday life. The engine rumbled beneath me as the taxi merged onto Lakeshore Drive, carrying me through Chicago's winter landscape. Gray sky pressed down like a heavy, unrelenting blanket. Streetlights flickered hesitantly against the dim morning, trying to hold back the encroaching gloom. Christmas decorations still clung stubbornly to some windows, tinsel dulled by frost wreaths sagging under January's bitter chill. I checked my watch, 5:15 a.m. Traffic crawled sluggishly, brake lights painting crimson streaks on wet asphalt. The soft strains of jazz on the radio tugged at a place in my chest I hadn't realized still ached. Martha used to hum that same tune while cooking dinner, and suddenly the scent of coffee and warm bread felt like a phantom pressing against my senses. My chest tightened, not from the recent surgery but from memory, from longing, from the ache of absence. "Been in the hospital long?" the driver asked, his eyes flicking toward me in the rearview mirror. I nodded, words practiced in my mind for days now. 3 days. Heart surgery. They felt lighter than when I first rehearsed them with the nurses, with the chaplain who had stopped by, with the quiet moments of reflection that had left me teetering between fear and hope. The heater hummed, blowing warm air, scented faintly with coffee and air freshener. I pressed my face to the window, watching familiar streets drift past like memories sliding over each other. There was the park where I had taught Tommy to throw a curveball, the ice cream shop, where Lily always insisted on strawberry with rainbow sprinkles. My breath fogged the glass. How many times had I traveled this route? Grocery runs, picking the kids up from school when Adeline worked late, doctor visits for the creeping reminders of age and heart trouble. I knew every pothole, every stop sign, every familiar crack in the pavement. This was my world now. Smaller than Detroit, yes, but warmer, more intimate, fuller. The phone call from Adeline still nagged at me like a splinter under my fingernail. "Find yourself a motel," she had said. The words repeated in my head, jagged and sharp. Not my Adeline, the girl who had curled up in my lap for bedtime stories, the young woman who called every Sunday just to chat about nothing and everything at once. Stress and exhaustion, I reminded myself. She was carrying too much. Carl's unpredictable hours, the kids' school, needs the crushing weight of life pressing down on her shoulders. Grief, too. I'd learned that after Martha died, grief twisted words and actions, making people say things they never truly meant. It had made me clumsy, impatient, fearful, yet somehow, even through it all, love remained. The taxi turned onto Oak Street and my heart lifted despite the lingering ache. Almost home. Almost to the warm embrace of family. I imagined Tommy rushing to show me his latest drawing, probably a ferocious dinosaur trampling over a city skyline, and Lily insisting on making me tea in her plastic cups that never quite fit adult hands. My chest swelled at the thought. House numbers flicked past 1410, 1412, 1416. There it was, 1420, the white colonial with blue shutters I had helped paint last spring. The small front yard where we'd built a snowman the previous Christmas. The driveway where Carl's truck usually sat empty. The windows were dark. I swallowed hard. This was the right address, yes. The driver slowed and pulled to the curb. "You sure this is it?" he asked, his voice cautious. "Yes," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "This is my daughter's house." I fumbled for my wallet, my hands clumsy from cold and lingering medication, the small key pressing reassuringly against my palm. They must be out running errands, I told myself, letting hope fill the cracks where doubt had crept. The meter read $18.50. I handed him $25. "Keep the change," I said. "You sure you'll be okay?" he asked, glancing back at the darkened windows. "I have a key," I said, patting the familiar weight in my pocket. "All right, take care," he replied, pulling away as the taxi's tires crunched over ice-dusted pavement. I exhaled slowly, letting the cool morning air wash over me. Almost home. Almost back to laughter, chaos, and love. Almost back to being where I belonged. Cold air slammed into my face as I stepped onto the sidewalk, biting through the thin layers of my coat. The taxi pulled away its tail lights, fading into the dim winter haze, leaving me standing alone on the street. My small duffel bag felt heavier than it should have, a tangible weight pressing against my weary hands, carrying everything I owned, or at least everything that still belonged to me. I looked up at the house, my sanctuary for the past 2 years, the place I had called home, and something inside me faltered. All the windows were dark, not just dimmed, but swallowed in shadow. Even the porch light, the one Adeline always left burning for me, had been extinguished. And yet I had a key. I was expected. This was my home. I walked slowly up the front path, my steps cautious on the slick, frost-coated concrete. Each footfall echoed faintly in the quiet night, mingling with the whisper of the wind through bare branches. My fingers clutched the familiar brass key, feeling the familiar grooves and weight as I inserted it into the lock. Click. The door yielded without resistance, the familiar creak of its hinges, like a note in a melody I had known by heart. Hundreds of times I had turned this key coming home from doctor's appointments, grocery runs, late nights when everyone slept. Tonight, though, the sound was hollow, unfamiliar, and foreboding. I stepped inside, calling softly, "Hello, anyone, home?" My voice bounced off the walls, swallowed by the silence. Nothing answered me. No soft hum of the television, no laughter of children playing, no cheerful call of Adeline from the kitchen. Only emptiness. My pulse quickened. I fumbled for the light switch, my fingers tracing the wall with muscle memory. Click. Light flooded the living room and instantly my chest sank. Everything was in its place, or almost everything but wrong. The furniture sat correctly, yet somehow alien. My worn brown recliner, my refuge after long days, had been pushed into a corner. The magazines I'd left scattered casually on the coffee table were gone, the surface bare. I called again, louder this time, "Tommy Lily." The house held only echoes. Each step I took through the familiar layout, the kitchen where Lily and I had made pancakes on Saturday mornings, the dining room where Tommy had wrestled with homework at the big oak table, felt like walking through a museum exhibit of someone else's life. Everything looked normal, yet hollow, lifeless. I reached my bedroom at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar. A sliver of the interior showed a scene I wasn't prepared for. I pushed it open and froze. Suitcases, old-fashioned floral-patterned luggage that definitely wasn't mine, sat neatly on the bed. A pair of men's work boots size 11 or 12 stood rigid beside the dresser. Prescription bottles crowded the nightstand, their labels foreign, their contents unknown. The air smelled wrong, overlaid with someone else's aftershave, unfamiliar soap, a life intruding upon mine. My family's photos had been turned face down on the dresser. Martha and me on our wedding day, Adeline's high school graduation pictures of the grandkids. It was a silent, mocking statement, as if someone had deliberately tried to erase our presence, to make me feel as if the memories themselves had been suffocated. I touched one of the suitcases with a trembling finger. Solid, real. Not a hallucination, not a symptom of medication or post-surgery stress. Someone had taken my space. My room, my home, my sanctuary had been invaded. In the closet, my neatly pressed shirts hung squeezed to one side, shoved together by garments that weren't mine. Women's dresses that weren't Adeline's, men's pants creased sharper than any I owned. My belongings looked small, apologetic, almost ashamed to exist in the corners that remained. I sank heavily onto the living room couch, the same spot where I had laughed with the children just days ago, where we had shared cartoons and whispered stories. The house sighed around me, the steady tick of the clock, the low hum of the refrigerator, the winter wind rattling the windows. But no human sounds, no life, only silence stretching and pressing down, leaving me stranded in the space that should have been my refuge but felt suddenly foreign and menacing. A cold shiver ran down my spine. My home had become a stranger, and I was utterly alone. The kitchen revealed even more evidence of intrusion, each detail gnawing at my chest. Coffee cups cluttered the sink, none of them mine, their patterns foreign and jarring. Scribbled grocery lists clung to the refrigerator, written in handwriting I didn't recognize. The milk on the counter was from a brand we never bought, the carton cold and ominous under the fluorescent light. Someone had been living here, sleeping in my bed, using my bathroom, sitting in my chair. Yet my family was nowhere to be found. I checked my watch. 5:45. The hospital discharge felt like hours ago, though only an hour had passed. Time seemed to fold in on itself, stretching and contracting in strange, cruel ways when your world tips sideways. I tried Adeline's number again, but it went straight to voicemail. Carl's phone offered the same sterile silence. My chest tightened, not from the surgical pain, but from a deeper, clawing anxiety. Each missed call echoed the words I'd heard earlier. Find yourself a motel. She had known. Adeline had known I wouldn't be welcome here, that strangers were sleeping in my bed while I'd been in the hospital. But why? What had I done wrong? I had helped them buy this house. I had sold my own place and given them the down payment. I had moved in to help with the children, to be useful, to be family, and yet my presence was not wanted. Outside, the front window reflected the same empty street, icy and indifferent. No cars pulled in, no lights flickered on, no familiar laughter came to greet me. Then abruptly the quiet was broken by the low rumble of approaching engines. My heart hammered against my healing ribs. Doors slammed in succession, voices carried sharply on the cold air. Footsteps ascended the porch. A key turned in the lock. I froze on the couch, breath caught in my chest, heart pounding as the door swung open. Headlights swept across the front yard, washing the familiar path in warm golden light. Two cars pulled into the driveway. One was Adeline's Honda, the other an older sedan I didn't recognize. Car doors slammed again, the night air carrying fragments of conversation. My hands trembled as I moved toward the front door, each step deliberate, cautious, ready for confrontation or relief. Then two small figures broke from the group, charging toward me with uncontainable energy. Grandpa Tommy's voice cracked with excitement, a high-pitched mixture of joy and disbelief. "You're home! We missed you so much!" Lily ran after him, shorter legs pounding the concrete, arms outstretched. I knelt carefully, mindful of my surgical incisions, and gathered them into my arms. Their warmth pressed against my chest, a living antidote to the cold anxiety that had gripped me all evening. "My heart feels perfect now that I see you two," I whispered, my voice catching. Their laughter and chatter thawed a part of me I didn't realize had frozen during those long, empty hours. Behind them, Adeline emerged from the driver's seat, her face unreadable, tight with something I couldn't place. Stress, guilt, or anger. Carl climbed out slowly, shuffling awkwardly, avoiding my eyes. From the second car came two elderly figures, stern and calculating. The woman clutched her purse like a weapon. The man's arms were crossed, his gaze sharp and evaluating. I recognized them now, Vera, Carl's mother, and Eldon, his father. Their presence added tension to an already charged scene, their eyes measuring me as though I were an intruder. Dad, Adeline's voice cut through the children's gleeful shouts, cold and precise, like the wind whipping around the house. "What are you doing here?" I stood slowly, placing one hand on each grandchild's shoulder, letting their small warmth anchor me. "I live here, honey." "They discharged me this afternoon," I said, steadying my voice despite the flutter of fear and anger twisting in my chest. Carl shifted uneasily. We weren't expecting you tonight." Vera and Eldon advanced, their eyes scrutinizing, judgmental. Vera adjusted her coat possessively, as if preparing for a battle, while Eldon's frown deepened, his presence imposing. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like the center of a storm. Yet in the middle of it, holding Tommy and Lily close, I felt a flicker of clarity and determination. No one, not even those I loved, could erase my place here. "Complications," Eldon muttered under his breath to his wife Vera, his voice low but sharp like a knife cutting through the icy evening air. Tommy tugged gently at my cardigan, his small hand warm against my shaking fingers. "Grandpa, we went to that new pizza place, the one with the arcade games. I saved you 2 quarters to play next time," he said, his voice bright with innocent excitement. Lily bounced on her toes beside him, her curls bouncing, eyes sparkling. "And I drew you a picture of a heart. But Mommy said you might not want to see hearts right now. But I think you would, because it's a happy heart with a smile." Their innocence, pure and untainted, clashed violently with the tension radiating from the adults standing around us. Adeline's jaw was rigid, her lips pressed tight as she watched me cradle the children. Carl fiddled nervously with his phone, though the screen remained blank, his attention a tether to nothing. Vera and Eldon flanked us like predators, circling prey. Their presence heavy, suffocating, their eyes sharp with judgment. The porch light overhead cut through the darkness, casting long, harsh shadows that danced across everyone's faces. Frost had already begun to glaze the car windshields, the winter air carrying the distant hum of traffic through the quiet suburban street. Windows across the block glowed warmly, families inside preparing for cozy evenings that contrasted starkly with the cold hostility here. And I realized then the chill pressing against my spine came from more than the winter. It came from the weight of betrayal, from the strange arrangement that had turned my home against me. Lily's voice broke through the silence, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Are you cold, Grandpa?" I looked down at her, the question soft, concerned, innocent. My chest tightened, but not from cold. I wasn't cold. I was terrified. Everything clicked into place: the suitcases in my bedroom, the turned-down photographs, the foreign prescription bottles, the hollow absence of my belongings where they had belonged. I watched 5 adults arrayed around me, each carrying a version of authority or entitlement that felt alien, and I realized the house I had returned to, the sanctuary I had expected, had been usurped while I lay recovering. Adeline inhaled deeply, her posture suddenly purposeful, almost rigid in its decisiveness. Keys jangled in her hand nervously, but with intent, as she stepped closer to the porch, fixing me with a look I had never seen before, determined, controlled, businesslike. "Dad, we need to talk," she said, her tone brokering no argument. "There have been some changes while you were gone," she continued, each word falling into the frigid night air like shards of glass. The same cold that had crept through my hospital room now slid down my spine, tightening around my ribs. Tommy and Lily stiffened beside me, sensing instinctively the shift in mood, their small bodies pressing closer for reassurance. "What changes?" My voice sounded steadier than I expected, but my hands trembled slightly. "And whose things are in my bedroom?" Adeline glanced at Carl. He immediately bent his gaze toward his shoes, pretending absorption in the mundane, as if evading the gravity of the confrontation could erase it. She straightened her shoulders, voice firm. "Eldon and Vera needed a place to stay. Your room, it was available." "Available," I repeated, the word foreign in my mouth. "But I live here. This is my home too." Vera stepped forward, clutching her purse like armor, eyes narrowed. "We're family too. We have rights." Eldon nodded curtly beside her. "The boy needs to understand practical arrangements," he said, voice clipped. I turned to Carl, hoping for a word of defense, an acknowledgement that this was temporary, a spark of understanding. But he cleared his throat, weakly, eyes averted. "We thought you'd understand," he murmured. Understand what my surgical scar throbbed under the stress, sharp and insistent, a painful reminder of my vulnerability and of the betrayal. That I had been denied my own bed, my own room while recovering from heart surgery. Tommy's head swiveled back and forth, confusion etched across his young face. "Why is Grandpa upset?" "What's wrong?" Lily tugged on Adeline's coat, small fingers trembling. "Mommy, why are you being mean to Grandpa?" Adeline ignored, her eyes locked on me, unflinching, immovable. "Actually, Dad," her voice cut through the winter night like steel, "it's not your home. Not anymore." The words struck like physical blows, each syllable pounding through my chest. The medication, the stress of the shock, combined into a haze that blurred my vision. I gripped the porch railing for support, my knuckles white. The warmth of the children at my side did little to soothe the cold weight of disbelief and rage pressing down on me. In that moment, the world seemed suspended, frozen between the laughter of children, the icy air, and the chilling clarity that the people I loved most had conspired to make me a stranger in my own home. "Where exactly do you expect me to sleep?" My voice cracked low and raw, and my hands shook, not from cold, but from a rage so deep it made my chest ache through the healing ribs. Every muscle in my body tensed as I tried to process the absurdity, the cruelty of what I was hearing. Adeline's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile on someone else's face, but here it was, empty, sharp, alien. She pointed across the yard, her arm cutting a straight line through the frosty night air. "We set up a space for you right there." My eyes followed her gesture to the small wooden structure near the garage. The doghouse, that tiny weather-beaten shelter that had sat empty for years because they never got the pet they'd promised the children. Under the harsh glare of the porch light, it looked smaller than I remembered. Pathetic, diminished, almost mocking. Comprehension hit me like a physical weight, settling in my chest with a cold, unforgiving press. "You're joking," I whispered, barely finding breath. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Her voice was sharp, flat, devoid of warmth or recognition of our shared history. "It's weatherproof. There's room for a sleeping bag." The words landed like bricks. My hand flew to my chest instinctively, where my heart pounded against healing ribs, each beat a painful reminder of my vulnerability. I stumbled back, taking in the faces around me. Carl's eyes avoided mine, glued to his phone like a coward hiding behind indifference. Eldon's expression was satisfied, his lips curled in a smirk that held no kindness. Vera's smirk, entitled and possessive, made my stomach turn. Then Tommy broke from the group, his small frame shoving through the space between us. "That's not fair. Grandpa can't sleep outside." Lily's small voice rose, trembling and raw. "He's sick." Her tears glistened on her cheeks in the cold porch light, a beacon of innocence in this storm of cruelty. "Why can't Grandpa sleep in his room?" Adeline's reply was cruel in its simplicity, practical and pitiless. "Because Eldon and Vera are paying rent. You're not." The final piece of betrayal slammed into me like ice water. Not only had they stolen my room, my sanctuary, my home, they were profiting from it. I thought of the $180,000 I had given them when I sold my Detroit house, the money that had made their mortgage manageable, their life comfortable. Every dollar a sacrifice, every sacrifice meant to support the family I loved. And now, nothing. Carl finally looked up from his phone, muttering weakly, "It's just until we figure things out." Figure what out? My voice grew louder, steadier, fed by a fury that burned through my veins. "How to house your father-in-law in a building meant for animals." The porch light flickered above us, casting long dancing shadows that made the scene feel like some surreal nightmare. Car headlights illuminated the driveway, neighbors' eyes surely peeking behind curtained windows, witnessing a scene that should never have been. The cold wind whipped around us, sharp and biting, but I felt nothing but clarity now. I straightened my shoulders, fixing Adeline with a gaze that was calm, deliberate, unflinching. The daughter I had raised, the woman I had sacrificed for the child I had loved unconditionally, she now regarded me as less deserving of shelter than strangers who paid rent. I exhaled slowly. "I see," I said, voice controlled, each word deliberate. "I understand perfectly now." Something inside me shifted, not breaking, but hardening. The collapse of my world had forged a new resolve, a quiet steel beneath my ribs. "I'll get my things," I said quietly, turning toward the house, deliberately calm, while fury simmered beneath the surface. "Dad, you're being dramatic," Adeline called after me, voice defensive, sharp, and attempt at control. "Just temporary," she added as I climbed the porch steps. "Until what, Adeline?" My question hung in the freezing night. She didn't answer. I didn't need her to. I knew the truth. Until she needed money again. Inside, I moved methodically through what had been my room. Vera's floral dresses hung where my neatly pressed shirts used to be. Eldon's work boots squatted beside the bed as though claiming dominion. Prescription bottles, strange toiletries, and foreign scents filled the air. I pushed them aside with steady hands, gathering my clothes from the corners where they had been shoved like unwanted things. Tommy and Lily trailed me, their small voices, a running commentary of confusion and concern. "Grandpa, where are you going? Can I come with you?" I folded my shirts carefully, the way Martha had taught me 40 years ago. Each crease a tiny reclamation of order and dignity. "I have somewhere else to go, sweetheart. Don't worry about me." "But you just got home." Tommy said, his eyes wide with disbelief and hurt. I looked down at them, my chest tightening, a pang of sorrow twisting alongside the anger. "Yes, I just got home," I said softly. "But home isn't always where you think it is." And in that moment, I knew that reclaiming my life would not come from pleading or hoping. It would come from quiet, deliberate action, even if it meant standing alone against the family I had once trusted with everything. "We plan to build snow forts tomorrow." Tommy's voice rang out, bright, yet tinged with disappointment, cracking slightly at the edges. I swallowed hard, feeling a pang of helplessness as I realized those plans would have to wait. I turned toward my dresser and opened the small jewelry box. There it was, my wedding ring, resting silently beside Martha's engagement ring, the two of them waiting for no one yet, still holding the weight of every promise, every memory. I slipped my ring back onto my finger, the familiar weight settling with comforting inevitability, grounding me. In that instant, memories flooded back. I saw Adeline at 25, tears streaming down her cheeks in my kitchen after her divorce. "Dad, I don't know what I'll do. The kids need stability," she had said, her voice breaking. I had held her close then, whispered that things would be all right, that together we would find a way forward. When Carl entered the picture, I had welcomed him as one of my own. When they decided to buy this house, I had sold my own without hesitation. "The children need their grandfather," she had said, pleading softly. "And then, we need you here, Dad." Now, decades later, that very house had been turned against me. My family photos, Tommy's school picture, Lily's ballet recital, Adeline's wedding day had been turned face down in the dresser drawer, hidden away like embarrassing secrets. I gently tucked each one into my suitcase, careful as if preserving a fragile world. They were all I truly needed. From the living room came Adeline's voice speaking to the children, with practiced calm. Grandpa needs to stay somewhere else for a while. It's complicated. Behind her, Carl's voice murmured weakly about weekend visits. Eldon, ever practical, added, the arrangement works better for everyone. I pulled my heaviest coat around me, bracing against the winter air that had begun to creep through the cracked window frames. My small suitcase held everything that mattered: photos, a few changes of clothes, my father's old watch. Every other object in that house could remain behind. In the quiet living room, I picked up the phone and dialed the taxi company with fingers steady, despite the lingering adrenaline. I need a ride to Michigan, I said firmly. Yes, I can pay for the distance. Adeline looked up sharply, incredulous. Michigan, Dad? What's in Michigan? Her voice carried both shock and incredulity. I didn't answer. Behind her, Carl and his parents exchanged uneasy glances, the first real signs that they had misjudged me. None of them had imagined I might have a life, resources, or options beyond their small, selfish calculations. They had assumed I was helpless, dependent, trapped within the confines of their generosity or their control. 20 minutes later, headlights pierced the early dusk, and the taxi pulled into the driveway. The driver, a middle-aged woman with kind, empathetic eyes, helped me carefully with my suitcase, her presence quietly reassuring. I knelt one final time to gather my grandchildren in my arms. Lily whispered against my shoulder, will you call us every day? I promised, meaning every word. Tommy hugged me fiercely, his small arms clinging to me with a mix of love and confusion. I love you, Grandpa. I don't understand why you have to go. I stroked his hair gently. Sometimes adults make decisions that hurt people they love, I said softly, but that doesn't mean the love disappears. Adeline stood frozen on the porch, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on me. For a fleeting moment, the mask of control slipped. A flicker of doubt, perhaps guilt, passed over her features. But Vera stepped beside her, firm and possessive, and the moment was gone. The weight of confrontation returned, cold and immovable. I straightened slowly, lifting my suitcase. The taxi driver nodded, patient and silent, as I turned toward the back of the vehicle. The engine rumbled to life, and I climbed in the winter night, wrapping around me like a heavy, sharp cloak. Through the rear window, I watched my grandchildren waving small arms, stretching toward me, until the house disappeared behind a row of bare trees. And as we drove away, I felt something stir deep inside, an unfamiliar mixture of sorrow, resolve, and freedom. I had lost my place for now, but I had not lost myself. The road ahead was unknown, winter, dark, and biting, yet for the first time in weeks I felt certain that I would find warmth again. Relief and devastation collided in my chest, forming a strange, almost dizzying weight I had never known before. It was the paradoxical freedom of having nothing left to lose, tempered by the deep ache of betrayal and abandonment. My hands tightened around the suitcase handle, knuckles whitening as if gripping it could anchor me to reality. Where exactly in Michigan? The taxi driver asked softly, her eyes flicking toward me in the rearview mirror. I swallowed, heart pounding, and recited the address I'd memorized from old letters, though I had never stepped foot there, as an adult, Olson Manor, New Buffalo. For the past hour, the driver had maintained a quiet vigilance, sensing something heavy in the silence of this late-night journey. Snow crunched under the tires as we turned onto the winding driveway, unfamiliar yet hauntingly familiar. Each curve brought memories I had nearly forgotten, frozen under the moonlit sky. Tall oak trees, burdened with winter snow, arched above us like cathedral pillars, framing our approach in a world both magical and surreal. This is someplace, the driver murmured, breaking the spell with awe as the manor slowly revealed itself through the headlights. Olson Manor rose from the darkness like a sentinel of another era. 3 stories of weathered stone, tall windows reflecting moonlight, and a wraparound porch I remembered running across as a boy. This was Uncle Harlan's domain, eccentric, imposing, entirely unexpected to anyone who had ever dismissed him as the family oddball. I stepped from the taxi, suitcase in hand, my breath fogging in the cold, and looked up at the house I had inherited without even knowing it. The winter air bit through my coat, but somehow I felt warmer than I had in months. This was no act of charity, no begrudging hospitality. This was mine. And in that realization, I felt a weight lift from my chest. I could almost hear Uncle Harlan's voice echoing in my mind, precise and sharp as ever. Third stone from the left post, Burl. Count carefully. I followed his directions, fingers numb but determined, and found the brass key hidden exactly where he had described. Even in death, he was taking care of me, providing for the day he knew would come. The front door yielded to the key with a satisfying turn, swinging open to reveal solid oak, built to endure generations, a testament to permanence and security. Inside, the air smelled of cedar, old leather, and quiet memory, as if the house itself had been waiting for my return. My fingers traced the familiar grooves on the banister, and I moved instinctively to the electrical panel, flipping the main switches. Light poured into the foyer, illuminating the crystal chandelier I had marveled at as a child, dusty but intact, catching glimmers of the winter moon through tall windows. Every room told a story I had almost forgotten. The library, lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves, still smelled of books and adventure, and the massive stone fireplace bore witness to years of bedtime stories Uncle Harlan had read to me. The kitchen, gleaming with chrome and mint green appliances from the 1950s, held a quiet dignity, as if preserving the hands that had once prepared countless meals. Outside, Lake Michigan stretched endlessly under the moon silver, and still promising both solitude and boundless possibility. I climbed the grand staircase slowly, each step a careful negotiation with my chest still tender from surgery. But the ache was no longer one of pain. It was the expansion of possibility, the opening of a future that belonged to me alone. The master bedroom awaited, overlooking the lake. Its four-poster bed was made with fresh linens, as though anticipating my arrival. Someone had maintained this place, keeping it ready, waiting. On the mahogany desk sat a manila envelope marked in Uncle Harlan's meticulous handwriting, "For Burl, should family disappoint you." My hand trembled as I lifted it. 5 years had passed since his death, yet he had foreseen this day, this moment of ultimate betrayal and abandonment by the very people I had trusted most. He had created a sanctuary for me, a refuge from the cruelty of a world that had failed to honor loyalty and love. The envelope was substantial, heavy with the weight of knowledge, instructions, and secrets I was meant to discover only now. Letters, legal documents, plans, everything Harlan had never told me, waiting patiently for the moment when I would be ready to receive it. And in that instant, standing alone in the grand silence of Olson Manor, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years: hope, possibility, and the quiet, unshakable certainty that I still had a life worth living. I sank heavily into Uncle Harlan's leather chair, the rich scent of aged hide filling my lungs, letter opener, resting loosely in my hand. For the first time in what felt like decades, I understood the truth. I was no longer the powerless, displaced old man my family had cast aside. I was Burl Olson, heir, not just by name, but by right and blood, custodian of 80 years of family history, sitting in a mansion that had silently waited for me, filled with resources and legacy my relatives could never have imagined. The weight of it settled across my shoulders like a mantle, and yet it brought a warmth I hadn't felt since Martha's laughter echoed through our old Detroit home. Tomorrow I would immerse myself in whatever wisdom Uncle Harlan had left behind. Tonight, however, was for a simpler joy. I would sleep in my own bed, in my own house for the first time in 2 long years. The sheets smelled faintly of cedar polish and sunlit linen, a subtle reminder that the manor had been maintained, cared for, waiting for me to return. Sunlight streamed through tall, frost-edged windows, catching on the lake beyond and scattering silver across the floors. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle wound its way through the Michigan countryside, a lonely, nostalgic sound that felt like a personal welcome. The envelope from Harlan lay unopened on the nightstand, its presence a silent promise. I wanted to savor the peace of the morning before opening it, letting the sunlight, the smell of old wood, and the quiet stillness sink into my bones. Eventually, I lifted it carefully, slicing the envelope open with the letter opener. Each page unfolded like a map of his intentions, his measured, elegant handwriting, a voice from beyond the grave. I knew this day would come. It began. Burl, the family often mistakes kindness for weakness. This house has been in our family for 80 years. It is yours by right and by heart. Do not let them guilt you. You have given enough. Every sentence felt like a gift, years of permission distilled into ink on paper. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, not from sadness, but from the profound relief of validation. This house, this legacy was mine, and with it came a responsibility I had longed to embrace, to live, to care, to thrive, not out of obligation, but because it was mine to steward. I moved through the house, slowly dusting each surface with deliberate care, mindful of the tenderness in my chest as it healed. My presence in New Buffalo did not go unnoticed. At the local hardware store, the owner greeted me with wide-eyed recognition. "You must be Harlan's nephew," he said warmly. "I've talked about you constantly." At the grocery, the clerk smiled knowingly. "Welcome back. Stay in long this time." Even these small acknowledgments carried weight. They reminded me that the community had not just known my uncle, but had in a sense already been expecting me. By the third day, the rhythm of life in Olson Manor felt natural, almost like stepping into a song I had known as a boy. Morning coffee by the frost-dusted windows, watching the sunrise, paint Lake Michigan in swaths of gold and soft pink, became a ritual of reclamation. I moved through light household tasks paced to honor my recovery. Afternoons were devoted to reading in Uncle Harlan's library, surrounded by books that smelled of decades of knowledge and adventure, the silence occasionally punctuated by the gentle creak of the floorboards. Mrs. Peterson from next door brought over homemade soup, her face alight with fond recognition. "It's good to see life in this house again," she said softly. "Your uncle was the finest man I ever knew." For the first time in years, I experienced the serenity of being needed by no one but myself. My phone buzzed intermittently with calls from Adelaide numbers that went unanswered as I deleted her messages unread. No grandchildren tugging at my sleeves, no dishes to wash, no guilt about being in the way. Just silence, freedom, and the luxury of a body allowed to heal, mind allowed to rest. Even the diner, a place I had visited as a boy, seemed transformed. Sarah, the waitress, remembered me instantly. "Your uncle always said you'd end up here eventually," she said, topping off my coffee without my asking. Her smile carried the quiet pride of someone who had known Harlan and now recognized that I had inherited more than just property. I had inherited his sense of purpose. Each day brought subtle victories, the taste of home-cooked meals in my own kitchen, my appetite returning after weeks of hospital food, sleep that deepened with each night spent in the bed that had belonged to generations before me, the comforting ritual of dusting shelves, turning pages, and reclaiming both space and self. Life, I realized, had room again for me, not the man they had discarded, but Burl Olson, the steward of legacy, the author of his own days finally home. Energy levels surged through me like a current as weeks passed. The stress that had once sat heavy on my shoulders melted into nothingness, replaced by a quiet, steady confidence I hadn't felt in decades. For the first time in years, I picked up the leather-bound journal I'd begun keeping in the hospital, its pages blank, waiting for thoughts I could finally call my own. Nobody needed anything from me except what I chose to give. Every word I wrote felt like reclaiming a part of myself that had been buried beneath obligation, betrayal, and years of quiet self-doubt. Uncle Harlan's final wisdom whispered through every moment, growing clearer with each passing day. "The town folk will welcome you. They remember me fondly, and they will see me in you." He had been right about everything: the sting of family betrayal, the necessity of a sanctuary that belonged to me by right, and the unparalleled healing that comes from belonging somewhere by choice rather than obligation. By the end of the week, I had settled into a rhythm that felt like the true definition of home. Mornings were for walks along the icy lake shore, breath steaming in the cold air, each step reminding me that I moved through the world on my own terms. Afternoons were spent on small projects around the manor, careful not to overexert my still recovering chest, each task leaving me with the satisfaction of creation rather than the exhaustion of servitude. Evenings belonged to the library and the books I'd always dreamed of reading, the stone fireplace crackling softly, casting a warm glow on shelves lined with knowledge and adventure. When I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, I barely recognized the man who stared back. Stronger, calmer, poised, with the unshakable bearing of someone who owned where he stood, not a displaced, dependent guest clinging to scraps of belonging, but the master of his own domain, the steward of a legacy reclaimed. And then the peace shattered at first, not violently, but with the subtle intrusions that pulled me from my reverie. The crunch of tires on gravel, a familiar Honda sliding up the long winding driveway, followed by a second car I did not recognize. 4 weeks of quiet mornings ended in an instant with the arrival of a family who thought they still held claim over me. I watched through the library window as Adeline stepped out, every movement radiating anger, tension, and something I could almost call desperation. Carl followed, calculating eyes sweeping the manor's facade as if he could appraise and dominate it with a glance. I did not move from my position. I did not wait for them to knock. My front door opened my domain, my rules, my authority. The air between us pulsed with the weight of unspoken history. "How could you hide this from us?" Adeline demanded, her voice breaking with fury and something close to panic. I met her gaze steadily, voice calm, deliberate, every syllable measured. "The same way you hid your intentions to throw me out like garbage." Carl stepped forward, voice lower, eyes drawn to the crystal chandelier above me, dazzling in the morning light. "Do you know what this place is worth? We could have helped you manage it." I let a slow, dry smile curl at the corner of my lips. "Manage it into your bank account, you mean?" I watched his color flush at the precision of my words. Their carefully rehearsed lines, honed over decades of manipulation, met a wall that could not be breached. Adeline spun, desperate eyes seeking purchase. "We gave you a home for 2 years. I let the truth fall like steel, calm, factual, unassailable. I gave you a corner of my own money. I paid for that house. I have given enough." For the first time, uncertainty flickered in her gaze. The manipulation, the guilt trips, the familiar pressures, they failed. She looked at me and saw not the dependent, fearful father she had trained herself to dominate, but a man fully restored to power, dignity, and self-possession. "Dad," she whispered, trembling slightly, "you're being unreasonable. We're family. Families share. Families protect each other." I shook my head, slowly, steady as the manor walls that surrounded me. "Family does not take what isn't theirs. Family does not erase years of sacrifice, and family does not decide what a man's life is worth. I am Burl Olson. This house is mine. My choices, my rules, my life." For the first time in decades, silence fell. Not fear, but respect. Not submission, but recognition. The manor, the legacy, the life I had reclaimed, all of it radiated back at me. And in that silence, I finally felt entirely, unshakably home. I cut in sharply, my voice calm, but edged with steel. "They don't point to doghouses when their relatives need shelter." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Carl wandered through the grand rooms as if he were appraising in estate, fingers brushing against polished wood, eyes scanning each piece of furniture, every painting, every carefully placed artifact. "This place has to be worth over $1 million, he murmured, almost to himself. "Think what we could do with that kind of money. The kids' college funds." The words landed on me like stones. The kids. The same children you've used as excuses for manipulation for years, I thought. I followed him into the living room, silently observing, noting the way he measured space, calculated square footage, and imagined profit. Funny how their welfare only matters when it serves your own purposes. Adeline, seeing Carl's focus on numbers, shifted tactics to tears, the weapon she'd wielded so often in our past battles. "I made one mistake, Dad. One bad day when I was overwhelmed. You're throwing away our entire relationship over one bad day." My voice remained calm, but beneath it ran steel-hard resolve. "You planned this. You moved strangers into my room while I was recovering from surgery. You pointed to a doghouse as if I were less than human. That wasn't a mistake. That was who you really are." The family portraits on the walls seemed to lean closer, observing our confrontation with silent judgment. Generations of Olsons who had sacrificed, built, and persevered watched over the room. Uncle Harlan's presence lingered in leather-bound books, in the careful placement of furniture, in the quiet dignity of the house itself. This wasn't just a building. It was my heritage, my sanctuary, the place I belonged by right and by blood. Carl's face fell, and his pretense of reasoning faltered. "We need this," he said bluntly, abandoning all attempts at sentiment. "Our situation, it's worse than you know." We could lose everything. I shook my head slowly. Then you should have thought of that before you lost me. Simple, direct. No room for manipulation, no twisted arguments. Just truth. Consequences naturally following the choices they had made. They had gambled with my loyalty, and they had lost. Adeline stepped forward for one final attempt, her fingers trembling as they clutched my arm. The children miss you. They ask about you every day. For a heartbeat, my resolve wavered. Tommy and Lily, innocent victims of their parents' greed and cruelty, tugged at the corners of my heart. But I knew enabling them further would only teach the wrong lesson. Then bring them to visit, I said softly. They're welcome here anytime. You are not. The distinction struck her like a physical blow. Her face crumpled, genuine emotion, finally piercing through years of practiced manipulation. Carl's shoulders sagged, the weight of loss finally settling over him. This wasn't just money they had been denied, the power they assumed they held over me. This is our inheritance too, Adeline whispered, desperation threading her tone. No, I said, walking deliberately to the door and opening it wide. Your inheritance was my love, my help, my presence in your lives. You threw it away. This is mine. They left without another word, the truth finally sinking in. The powerless old man they had discarded no longer existed. I closed the door firmly, letting it echo through the hall, and walked toward my library, the sanctuary Uncle Harlan had built for me. Settling into his leather chair, I felt the weight of my regained dignity and the breadth of the life I had reclaimed. Time to call my lawyer about updating the will, I thought. 3 months of quiet mornings had restored far more than my physical health. They had returned my sense of worth, my authority, my right to stand unafraid in my own home. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall library windows, scattering golden rectangles across the Persian rug Uncle Harlan had brought from his travels, warming me as if affirming his presence. I was engrossed in a biography of Theodore Roosevelt when the shrill ring of the phone cut through the silence. Adeline's name glowed on the caller ID. I stared at it for 3 rings. 4. 5. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail like all the others before, but her persistence sparked something, a test perhaps, or an apology I was willing to hear. Hello. My voice was neutral, measured, neither welcoming nor hostile. Dad, please. Don't hang up, she pleaded, and for the first time in years, I sensed a tremor of real fear behind her words. Adeline's voice broke in a way I had never heard before, raw and trembling, threaded with panic. Dad, I know you hate me, but I don't hate you. Her words stumbled out, desperate pleading. I'm just not your solution anymore. A sob tore itself from her throat, jagged and helpless. I set down my book, the leather of Uncle Harlan's chair, groaning as I leaned back, feeling the weight of years and choices settle in my chest. Through the window, Lake Michigan shimmered peacefully under the gentle spring sun, unaware of the chaos carried on its wind. And where are your precious in-laws now? I asked quietly, almost rhetorically. They left. Her voice shattered completely, every word punctuated by ragged breaths. Packed up and drove away the minute they heard about the foreclosure. Didn't even say goodbye to the kids. The bitter irony sank deep. Eldon and Vera, who had seized my room with such entitlement, had abandoned ship the instant their convenient little arrangement became inconvenient. Uncle Harlan's old warnings echoed in my mind. Fair weather family Burl. They'll abandon you when the sun isn't shining. Adeline's words tumbled out, spilling over themselves. Carl lost his job in March. We've missed 3 mortgage payments. The utilities, they're being shut off tomorrow. Dad, I'm scared. I remained silent, letting her speak into the void, letting the weight of her own choices and the choices she had enabled fill the space between us. She rattled on credit cards, maxed savings, depleted friends, avoiding calls, the kind of total financial collapse that only comes when people live beyond their means and then lose the structure that once held them up. I made a mistake, she whispered finally. A terrible, awful mistake. But we're family. Doesn't that count for anything? Family protects each other, I said quietly. My voice calm, measured, yet threaded with a steel she couldn't touch. You pointed to a doghouse. I was stressed, overwhelmed. You know how Carl gets, and I know exactly how you get when you want something. Her voice, shaky and fragmented, tried to justify to reason, to find a loophole in reality itself. The question that hung in the air, steady and unyielding, was simple. What do you want from me now? Through the phone, I could hear her crying. Real tears. Not the manipulative, rehearsed kind she had used for years to bend my will. This was raw, naked fear. It stirred something inside me, not pity, not forgiveness, but something harder: clarity. Justice. The natural consequences of choices finally arriving, heavy and undeniable. Help us. Please, she begged, her voice breaking entirely now. I'll do anything. Sign papers, give you legal guardianship, whatever you want. Just help us. And Tommy and Lily, where are they during all this? I asked, my voice calm, cold even. At school, she admitted, voice tiny, almost lost. They don't know yet. We haven't told them. We might lose the house. Dad, I'm scared. Not for me. Her next words trembled in the air like fragile glass. For Tommy and Lily. They don't understand why we might lose our home. The mention of my grandchildren stretched the silence between us into something tangible, like a bridge neither of us dared to cross first. I could hear Adeline's ragged, uneven breathing, the desperate gasps of someone who had been drowning, but had finally stopped struggling. And in that silence, I felt the bitter, undeniable truth. The web of manipulation, fear, and entitlement had collapsed on itself, and all that remained was raw accountability and the chance to witness its consequences unfold. Tommy and Lily can come stay with me, I said at last, my voice calm but unwavering, indefinitely. The word indefinitely hung in the air, heavy with finality, echoing through the grand hallways of the manor. Adeline's voice cracked from the other end of the line. What about Carl and me? We're their parents. I didn't flinch. You're also the ones who tried to make me live in a doghouse, I said evenly, every word deliberate. Actions have consequences, Adeline, yours and mine. Her next words came quickly, desperate, almost pleading. That was a mistake, Dad. We were stressed. We didn't think you were calculating. There's a difference. I rose from my chair and walked to the frost-etched window, the cold pain biting my fingertips through the thin wool of my sweater. Outside, a pair of bright red cardinals flitted about, carrying twigs and leaves, building a nest high in the sturdy oak. Their labor, purposeful and patient, made the contrast even sharper. You planned my exile while I was having surgery. You arranged for strangers to take my room. You pointed to an animal shelter as my new accommodations. That wasn't stress talking. That was who you really are. A long silence stretched between us. Her voice, when it finally came, was barely a whisper. What? Are you saying I turned to face her, the weight of the manor behind me, like silent witnesses of decades of Olsen family history? I'm saying the children are welcome here. You and Carl need to figure out your own solutions. But I can provide stability for them. You separated yourselves from me easily enough. I traced abstract patterns on the frosted window with my finger, watching the cardinals settle into the perfect cradle of branches. The manor has plenty of room for Tommy and Lily. Good schools nearby, safe neighborhood, a stable environment, everything children need to thrive. And us. Carl's voice, hesitant and begrudging, came from the background, revealing he had been listening all along. Find jobs, rebuild your lives, learn to stand on your own. I paused deliberately, letting the weight of my words settle. The children can visit you on weekends, assuming you have somewhere stable for them to return to. Adeline's breathing grew ragged. You're punishing us, she cried, desperation, breaking through the controlled facade she often wore. I'm not punishing anyone, I said softly, my eyes fixed on the vibrant cardinals. I'm protecting them from chaos, from uncertainty, from adults who make children pay for their own poor decisions. Her voice trembled. We can change, Dad. We can be better. Then prove it, I said, turning away from the window. Get jobs, find a place to live. Show them what responsibility looks like instead of just talking about it. My gaze softened briefly as I pictured her as a small child riding her bicycle, stumbling and learning, trusting me to guide her. But Uncle Harlan's wisdom held me steady. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their choices. What about school? Their friends, when their whole lives are here. She protested, her words frantic. New Buffalo has excellent schools, I said evenly. The children will make new friends. They'll have a grandfather who puts their welfare first instead of using them as pawns in adult games. Her voice broke into silence, the weight of comprehension finally settling in. I, I never. The offer stands, I said firmly. Tommy and Lily are welcome here immediately. You and Carl can visit once you've proven you can provide them with a stable environment to return to. A long, trembling pause followed. Finally, she whispered, hollow and defeated, how long? However long it takes for you to become the parents they deserve. Instead of the ones you've been, I said each word deliberate, steady. Through the phone, I could hear her sobbing openly now, a sound that carried both despair and the first hints of understanding. No amount of tears, no desperate pleas could undo the doghouse moment. No promises about next time could erase the reality of their actions. Fine, she whispered. Broken. Yes. Whatever you want. Just take care of them. 3 weeks later, the manor had transformed. What had been a quiet sanctuary became a joyful family home, alive with the laughter of children who had known too much worry for their age. I stood at the kitchen window watching Tommy crouched in the soil tending the vegetable garden we had planted together, his small hands careful and earnest. Lily sat nearby at the patio table painting watercolors of cardinals and winter trees, her tongue peeking out in concentration. Grandpa, the tomatoes are growing, Tommy called, voice bright with excitement. The boy had shot up at least 2 inches since arriving. Good food and reduced stress working their magic. I called back, cracking eggs for the Saturday morning pancakes. The routine, the simple rhythm of caring, teaching, and watching had become precious to me, a balm after years of betrayal and turmoil. Mornings brought coffee and sunrises over Lake Michigan, afternoons chores and small adventures around the sprawling property, and evenings by the fireplace with stories and laughter echoing through the halls. The children's transformation was remarkable. Tommy's teacher reported a steady improvement in both grades and attitude, while Lily's nightmares about losing the house had ceased almost immediately. And then, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, car tires crunched on the gravel driveway. Weekend visitors, their arrival heralded not by anxiety, but by anticipation. The manor at last was whole again, alive with the love, care, and laughter it had been built to sustain. Through the wide window of the living room, I watched Adeline and Carl step out of a battered Honda Civic. The car, scratched and dented, mirrored the decline in their lives over the past weeks. Both looked thinner, more worn faces, sunken from 3 weeks of minimum wage jobs and a cramped apartment in a less desirable Chicago neighborhood. Everything they once took for granted had been stripped away. Mom Lily dropped her paintbrush and ran toward the driveway, her small feet pattering on the gravel. Tommy followed close behind, excited but cautious, as if testing the stability of the world they had entered. Reunions like this were always complicated: love tangled with confusion, loyalty divided between parents and the grandfather who had become their protector. I opened the front door before they reached it, asserting the boundaries I had carefully maintained. Adeline, Carl. How was the drive? I asked, calm but watchful. Fine, thank you. Adeline answered, her voice carrying a new humility. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by thrift store finds. Manicured nails were now rough from restaurant work. But the difference in her eyes was more telling. The arrogance and entitlement had softened into recognition of consequences. The children look wonderful, I said, my gaze following Tommy and Lily. They were tan from hours outdoors, confident and strong in the security of the manor, thriving in a stable, loving environment. They had adapted remarkably to country life, as children naturally do when freed from adult anxiety. Mom, wait until you see my room, Lily exclaimed, grabbing Adeline's hand and tugging her up the stairs. Grandpa let me pick out everything, and I'm learning to fix the fence, Tommy added proudly. Grandpa's teaching me to use real tools. I watched from a careful distance, present but separate. The children needed their parents' love, but they also needed to understand that actions had lasting consequences. The weekly visits served both purposes, maintaining family bonds while reinforcing the stability of their new home. Dad. Adeline approached hesitantly after the children had dragged Carl away to see their latest projects. I want you to know, we're trying, really trying. I can see that, I replied, watching her carefully. And I could see it. The prideful arrogance had been replaced by genuine humility. Entitlement had given way to gratitude. How are the jobs going? I asked. Exhausting, humbling, she admitted, giving a weak smile. But we're learning what it means to earn our living instead of relying on other people. She gestured helplessly around the manor's grand interior. Instead of relying on family you were willing to discard, I finished quietly. Her face flushed, but she nodded in agreement. Yes, that she admitted softly. The afternoon passed quietly. Carl helped Tommy with a birdhouse project, while Adeline assisted Lily with her painting. I observed from my reading chair surrounded by Uncle Harlan's books, feeling his wisdom still present tangible in every room. This was how a family should function. Everyone contributing, everyone valued, everyone protected. As evening came and they prepared to leave, the children hugged their parents tightly, but showed no inclination to pack bags and follow. Stability had become more important than sentiment. We'll see you next weekend. Adeline promised, her voice measured but sincere. Drive safely, I replied, meaning every word. This time my instructions carried weight. Promises needed to be paired with action, and this lesson would not be forgotten. After the tail lights of Adeline and Carl's car disappeared down the long gravel driveway, a deep, calm quiet settled over the manor. I wandered down the familiar hallways, drawn to the warm glow of the library. There I found Tommy curled up in the worn leather armchair, his eyes glued to the pages of an adventure story, completely absorbed in the hero's daring exploits. On the rug beside him, Lily sat cross-legged, carefully piecing together a jigsaw puzzle of vibrant red cardinals perched among blossoming spring branches. The fire crackled softly in the stone hearth, filling the room with warmth and a sense of security. Outside, Lake Michigan stretched endlessly, its silvered surface reflecting the soft light of the spring evening waves, lapping in quiet rhythm. The scent of polished wood, the faint tang of old leather, and the comforting smell of wintergreen from the fire mingled in the air. Grandpa Lily's small voice broke the silence. She looked up from her puzzle, her eyes wide with concern. Are Mom and Dad going to be okay? They're learning important lessons, I said honestly, keeping my voice gentle yet firm. Sometimes people have to lose things they thought they couldn't live without in order to discover what really matters. Tommy set his book aside, sitting forward with a seriousness that only children could carry. His gaze pierced me with quiet understanding. Kind of like how you learned you didn't need to live in someone else's house to be happy. I smiled, a deep, quiet smile that came from the relief of watching them, safe and thriving. The wisdom of children never ceased to amaze me. Their insight, simple and untainted by bitterness, reminded me why all the struggles had been worth it, the late nights in hospitals, the betrayals, the heartbreaks. This was the reason to persevere. Later, after tucking them into their own beds that were truly theirs, in rooms filled with light warmth and their own personal touches, I sat alone in Uncle Harlan's leather chair. The firelight danced across the polished floors as I opened his journal to the final entry I had discovered the week before. The greatest gift we can give children is not shelter from life's storms, but the strength to weather them with dignity. Burl will understand this someday. I read each word slowly, letting it sink in. Uncle Harlan had been right about everything. Family wasn't merely blood, it was a choice, a commitment, and a sacred duty to protect those who couldn't yet protect themselves. Justice wasn't revenge. It was allowing the natural consequences of choices to teach lessons that words alone could never convey. Outside, a gentle spring rain began tapping against the windows, washing the world in soft gray light. Inside, two children slept peacefully, wrapped in the warmth of their own beds, their home finally a sanctuary. I watched them for a long moment, feeling a profound sense of completion. The manor with its towering windows, its worn bookshelves, the echoes of past laughter, and the quiet hum of life restored felt whole again. I leaned back in the chair, letting the firelight play across my face, and breathed deeply. After years of turmoil, betrayal, and heartache, peace had returned not just to the house, but to all of us who called it home. The weight of worry and doubt lifted, replaced by a deep, abiding gratitude. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, D Daily Stories, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.